Mr. President, I'd like to join Senator Alexander discussing this overtime rule. As he mentioned multiple times, Senator Collins and I dropped a companion bill here in the Senate that was already passed in the House that delays the overtime rule's implementation by 6 months. As he also mentioned, I am most certainly a co-sponsor of his bill as well. That is another approach, and quite frankly, we're all looking for different approaches to be able to accomplish something that needs to be done and needs to be done immediately. That is to address a regulation that's been put in place that can have serious, I believe, unintended consequences, but most certainly serious consequences across our economy. And I'll have some accusation that this administration wants to be able to damage the economy, wants to be able to damage small businesses, or wants to be able to damage universities and nonprofits. But I believe absolutely that is what is occurring. I am concerned, though, that the administration seems to have been deaf to the message that's come up over and over again from many of us here in the Congress, to be able to highlight these are serious issues. Have you evaluated it? The Small Business Administration even has real concerns that the data that they presented back to the Department of Labor was not used. And the advocate for small businesses, even within the Department of Labor, is challenging the Department of Labor to say, why didn't you use the data that we provided to be able to evaluate this? There are a lot of questions about how the regulation was promulgated itself, or what the end goal is. But let me tell you what the real consequences are on the ground. Let me give you a couple of hypothetical situations, and then I want to go into some practical ones. For instance, right now, a single mom who has a couple of kids at home is able to telecommute into work a couple of days from her particular job as maybe a sales marketing manager. She can be in the office for 3 days, telecommute a couple of days, saves her child care costs, and it gives her some flexibility. Under this rule, those same places would not typically allow someone to telecommute because they have to see exactly the hours that someone is working. And so she would have to physically be present in the office every day so that the work hours could be tracked, removing that flexibility and causing her increased child care costs and actually moving her into more of a situation where she's in a more structured environment, less suitable for her kids. Let me give you another thought on this. What if you reach into a situation with as any of us face, that many of the millennials that are right now leaving college and going into the workforce, well-trained, well-equipped, wanting to go in and get an assistant manager's position or want to be able to work into a salaried position. It'll be much more difficult for those individuals coming out of college now to land into a salaried position because overall, individuals around the country in hiring don't want to hire salaried positions anymore. They want to be able to hire hourly people. And so it'll be tougher for the generation coming out of college right now to be able to land in those early management positions. Is that a hypothetical situation? No, I would say it's already occurring. It's already happening in conversations around the country. When I was at home in August, traveling around the state, this overtime regulation was the number one question that came up when I talked to any business owner, any business person, any manager. The first thing they raised was the coming overtime rule, both in its complexity and trying to figure out how to be able to actually implement this and the cost of their business and the conversations that were already occurring with employees where they were moving someone from a salaried position to an hourly position. And their employees hated it because they liked working to a spot where they were in a salaried position. I also, during the August time period, had a conversation with a youth pastor at a church. And that youth pastor said they had just left a conversation with their pastor just a couple of days before, where their pastor said, you're going to have to start documenting your hours, each hour that you're actually working with kids, even your time at home that you're preparing a Bible study to actually teach the kids, because we can't afford for you to go over 40 hours. Now, this is someone who feels a calling to be able to work with students, that literally their pastor has to tell them, I know you want to help, you can't help more than 40 hours. Now, I would tell you, most youth pastors don't go into youth ministry because they really anticipate getting wealthy on it. They go into it because of a sense of calling and passion to be able to help students. This regulation is telling that person, turn your passion to work with the next generation down. You're limited in what you can actually do. And if you choose to volunteer beyond that, you put your employer, that church, at risk. The Osage Nation, their HR folks said this. This is William Scott Johnson. He said, I'm a HR professional at the Osage Nation and concerned about the impact the changes to the overtime regulations will have on my organization and employees. The NAFOA has heard from tribal governments who are concerned about the use of a single national salary threshold and how it would adversely affect limited resources, especially for tribes in rural areas. The YWCA Battered Women's Shelter in Oklahoma City wrote me. She said, I'm a human resource committee member at the YWCA Battered Women's Shelter, and I'm concerned about the impact that changes the overtime regulations will have on this nonprofit organization and its employees. All employees here make less than $50,000, except two top management. The impact of this new legislation could be catastrophic for payroll, as employees will have to be moved from exempt to non-exempt status simply due to the salary base being proposed. The Counseling and Recovery Services in Tulsa, Oklahoma wrote me. They said, I'm an executive HR professional at Counseling and Recovery Services, nonprofit community mental health center, and I'm concerned about the impact that the change of the overtime regulations will have on my organization and employees. As a nonprofit, our agencies are clinical staffing heavy. Thus, about 80% of our workforce will be impacted. The cost to meet the proposed regulations is expected to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars and will be a devastating impact to the community mental health industry overall. I received a note from a small business owner in Edmond. That's right at my hometown. They said the proposed changes will require us to make significant changes in the way we do business. If the proposed salary threshold moves forward, we will be forced to change all of our employees to hourly, which will result in the elimination of our bonus program. Our salaried managers make a significant amount of their income based on performance bonuses. Calculating bonuses for an employee for employees that have a potential overtime is extremely complicated, labor-intensive, and opens up a huge liability risk if miscalculations occur. One of the universities in my state wrote me and said, this rule essentially would turn millions of dollars of professional salaried jobs into hourly positions overnight, resulting in limited flexibility for workers, increased costs for colleges, universities, and other nonprofits and public sector employees that operate under very tight budgets, as we attempt to keep the cost of education as low as possible for constituents. Said, we do not disagree the overtime rules need to be updated to ensure the law remains relevant for today's workforce, but we're deeply concerned about the unintended consequences of a massive increase in such a narrow implementation window, which will impose serious hardships on our students, employees, and institutions. Last week, I met with leadership of the Department of Labor in a hearing. We discussed this exact issue. I talked about nonprofits and what a unique dynamic that they really are. Nonprofits actually raise money based on their low administrative cost. They can tell donors, the money that you give will get directly to the individuals who need it most because our administrative overhead is low. This overtime regulation will increase their administrative overhead and will make it harder for them to raise money. When I raised that issue to the Department of Labor, the officials of the Department of Labor told me, we understand that. So we met with the leadership of some of the nonprofit foundations around the country and told them that they should donate more to be able to cover the increased cost. I have to tell you, that has to be one of the most out-of-touch statements I've ever heard from someone in the federal government. My response was in such shock to say, do you know how many hundreds of thousands of nonprofits are in the country? You met with a few foundations and told those foundations you should donate more to be able to cover, when most every church, most every small nonprofit around the country that deals with mental health, that deals with domestic violence shelters, are not tapping into big, massive foundations. They're individuals within communities that donate, and they anticipate their donations are going to help those of greatest need. And the people that work in those locations, those nonprofits, are most often volunteers. But the very few number of individuals that are paid salaried individuals within nonprofits, they make a meager salary because they choose to, because they have a passion for the work of helping in domestic violence shelters, or helping at a church, or helping reach out to people that are in poverty, or helping with a clothing shelter or a food pantry. Now you're forcing those organizations to dramatically increase salary, which will dramatically decrease services to those in greatest need across our country. I'm astounded that the administration believes they can talk to a few people and a few foundations and just tell them, donate more, and that will fix this. There aren't more donors to just donate more. There are real needs in a lot of communities around the country. The small business owners that I've spoken to of late all tell me about the complexity of this. It's not just a matter of every employee. There's a tremendous number of exemptions as they work through the process. They want more time, and they don't like the cost increase, and they don't like what this is doing to their relationships within their business, and they do not like telling salaried employees, I'm sorry, you're going to have to move to hourly. All of this headache was created by an administration that knew all this in advance. The letters that I read to you earlier, those letters that were written to me, I presented to the Department of Labor a year ago. And the Secretary of Labor assured me they would take those things into account. We've seen the final rule. I can assure you they were not taken into account. And as tuition goes up in universities, this administration needs to stop complaining about the high cost of tuition in higher education, because this overtime rule will directly increase the cost of tuition in every university in the country. The day the final rule was proposed, the first text message that I received about it was from a university president who texted me and said, don't blame me next year when tuition goes up. There's no way I can stop it now. To which I responded back to him, don't blame me for this overtime rule. This is not one we put in statute. This is one the administration created. All of us want to see workers protected. All of us want to see things happen well in the United States. But the way this rule was implemented, the short period of time in the implementation, the size of the salary increase, and the few exemptions that are put into place have created an incredibly toxic effect for business across the country. Whether you're a large business, medium, small business, university, nonprofit, and I haven't even mentioned local government, which will be forced to raise taxes to be able to cover the cost of this. All of them are dramatically affected, and all of them are affected in this short period of time. That's why Senator Collins and I proposed a bill that lines up with what the House has already passed to say delay this 6 months. Most businesses are just trying to figure out what in the world they do with this and how they handle the implementation. Delay it for 6 months. I would tell you there's a tremendous amount that we have to deal with on top of just the delay. But at a minimum, let's delay it. There's no reason it has to go into effect right now, and it directly harms our economy in the days ahead. Mr. President, these are serious issues, and I would hope the administration would take it seriously and would understand the effect of the coming economy. I'm very well aware that this administration will be out of office when most of the economic effects will be felt. But the economic effects will most certainly be felt by this economy. And the long-term effect for those individuals graduating college right now, trying to land their first job into management, will be even tougher based on this one rule. There's no reason to do that to the next generation of leaders. There's no reason to raise tuition in every college. There's no reason to do this rule right now. I would challenge it to be readdressed, and at a minimum, to be delayed for 6 months. And with that, I yield the floor, and I would note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr.